Did you ask Keith Schreiber to kill your father?
Yes, I did.
Today we are going to deep dive into a topic that is still rarely talked about, and one that might surprise you: female murderers. While many believe that murderers are predominantly male, and that is true, the reality is far more complex than it may seem. These women stepped away from their stereotypically nurturing and caregiving roles to then become evil, dangerous, and deadly. What happened to them as children that would later manifest in these horrible crimes? One might find it hard to accept that these mothers, wives, and daughters could be capable of such depravity. Did you know that approximately 15% of all serial killers are women? That might not sound like a lot, but when you consider the sheer number of serial killers identified over the years, that percentage translates to hundreds of women who have committed these heinous acts. The crimes they committed were also often premeditated rather than quick acts of rage. Studies also show that many female serial killers are often motivated by financial gain or even personal relationships, in contrast to their male counterparts, often fueled by the thrill of killing itself. However, the intricate nature of these women's crimes makes personality profiling nearly impossible, significantly complicating the work of homicide investigators. Some female murderers employ different methods in their killings compared to their male counterparts, such as by using poison or manipulation rather than acts of pure violence. In occasions where childhood trauma plays an immense role, these women can supersede the brutality of the males. Let's take a look at some of the most dangerous women in the Southern Hemisphere and what motivated them to commit these unbelievable acts of violence. Our first case, Katherine Mary Knight, also known as Australia's Hannibal Lecter, was born in Tenterfield, New South Wales on the 24th of October 1955. Born to an alcoholic father, Ken Knight, who was a violent man and who would repeatedly her mum up to 10 times a day. Her mum Barbara would often confide in her children of her hatred of men and sex. When Katherine was older and went through a negative sexual experience with her partner, her mum would also tell her to just put up with it and stop complaining. In her school environment, she was also described by her friends as a loner and yet also a bully who would intimidate the smaller children. Later, an 18-year-old Katherine found employment in a slaughterhouse where her role was to decapitate pigs, where she discovered that she enjoyed watching the pigs' throats being slit. In 1974, Katherine allegedly dragged her heavily drunk and soon-to-be husband David Kellett, a truck driver, to their wedding on her motorcycle, and when they got there, Katherine's mother Barbara reminded David to watch out or Katherine would kill him if he ever did her wrong, and that Katherine had some screws loose somewhere. Not long until Katherine showed her true self. On Katherine and David's wedding night, she would also try to strangle him because he had fallen asleep after having only 3 times. Unable to cope with Katherine's possessiveness and her violent way of living, David left Katherine and moved to Queensland after she had just given birth to their firstborn, Melissa Ann. Knowing this, Katherine did the unthinkable and violently threw her pram side to side with her newborn still in it. Soon afterwards, Katherine was admitted to St Elmo's Hospital in Tamworth, where she was diagnosed with postnatal depression. After a few weeks of recovery, Katherine would leave a 2-month-old Melissa on railway tracks just before a train was scheduled to arrive. She then stole an axe, went into town, and threatened to kill multiple people. Luckily, a local homeless man known as Old Ted, who just happened to be nearby scavenging near the railway, discovered and saved little Melissa, reportedly just minutes before the train arrived. Katherine was arrested and taken back to St Elmo's Hospital, but after seemingly recovering, she signed herself out the very next day. In May of 1987, Katherine slit the throat of a 2-month-old dingo pup right in front of her new boyfriend, David Saunders, simply to demonstrate to him what would happen if he ever cheated on her, and then proceeded to knock him unconscious with a frying pan. Katherine's violence would only escalate from here, and after another heated argument they would have, in which she struck David Saunders in the face with an iron and then stabbed him in the stomach with scissors, David would then relocate to his old apartment in Scone, 130 kilometers away. However, upon later returning home, he discovered that she had shredded all of his clothes. This then led him to take an extended leave from work and go into hiding. When Katherine attempted to locate him, no one would reveal his whereabouts. A few months later, when he returned to Tamworth, he discovered that Katherine had contacted the police expressing her fear of him. As a result, they issued her an apprehended violence order, or AVO, against him, using yet another form of manipulation against him. A few years went by, and Katherine again became pregnant with her new beau, John Chillingworth, her co-worker from the slaughterhouse job she had got in 1974. The relationship lasted merely 3 years until Katherine got into an affair with John Price. John Pricey Price, a father of 3 with a reputation for being a terrific bloke, knew what he had gotten himself into. He knew of Katherine's violent reputation and still wanted to move in with her as long as his children liked her. At the beginning of their relationship, it was like a bunch of roses. However, in 1998, they had a dispute over John Price's unwillingness to marry her, and in retaliation, Katherine recorded a video of items John would often steal from work and sent it to his boss. Although the items were outdated medical kits he had retrieved from the company's rubbish bins, Price was dismissed from the job he had held for 17 years. On the same day, John kicked her out and she went back to her own home as news of her actions circulated throughout the town. Although a few months later the pair got back together, and at this point Katherine would isolate John from his friends and family, a stereotypical form of coercive control in an abusive relationship. The fights would also become more and more frequent between the pair. February 2000 came along and John was finally fed up again with Katherine. On his way to work, he filed a restraining order against Katherine to protect himself and his children. In the following afternoon, John also told one of his co-workers that if he did not come to work tomorrow, he might have been murdered by Katherine. On the 29th of February 2000, the frequent from Katherine had led to something even more sinister, dark, and unthinkable. Katherine allegedly planned the whole scenario out. She would send John's kids over for a sleepover at a friend's house and arrive at John's place while John was already asleep, bringing her new black lingerie she had bought earlier that day, as well as concealing a butcher's knife in the bedroom. After she woke him up, the pair had what she described as pleasurable, and John would again fall asleep soon after. Following this, she stabbed John 37 times in the front and back of his body with the butcher's knife she had prepared earlier. Based on the blood evidence, John had woken up, attempted to turn on the lights, and tried to escape. He was able to open the front door and get outside, only to be dragged back into the hallway of the house where he would ultimately bleed out and die. The autopsy report later showed that the stab wounds had pierced extremely deep into his vital organs. Not satisfied with murdering her de facto partner, John, she then cooked parts of his body, ate them, and then attempted to also serve them to his children when they returned from their sleepover. This vile and heinous act resulted in Katherine becoming the first ever woman in Australian history to receive a life sentence that was marked never to be released. Katherine was described as a vengeful and ruthless woman who harmed anybody who dared cross her path. However, while sitting in the dock during the trial, many observers noted that she resembled an ordinary mother. She appeared to be a meek and gentle woman, concealing the true nature of the hateful monster beneath the facade. Reflecting on Katherine's life, there were numerous signs that she might eventually commit murder. Over the years, people had grown accustomed to her erratic behaviour and simply accepted it as nothing more than part of her personality. What would you do if you knew someone with erratic behaviour like Katherine? Let me know in the comments.
The story of Belinda van Krevel. She's been dubbed Belinda van Evil.
Our next case is about Belinda van Krevel, who was born to a Dutch immigrant father, Jack van Krevel, who was allegedly, according to Belinda, and her murderous brother Mark. The family lived in Albion Park near Wollongong, New South Wales. Mark van Krevel, now Mark Valera, at the young age of 19, murdered Wollongong's mayor, Frank Arkell, and a shopkeeper, David O'Hearn. Belinda's mother, Elizabeth Carroll, would leave the family when Belinda was just 2 years old, and left them in the hands of an incapable father, not knowing the criminal saga awaiting the family. To understand Belinda, it is crucial to understand her family dynamic. Allegedly, Belinda's father Jack used to beat both Belinda and Mark from the age of 5. He would beat Belinda so badly that she would wet herself, and there were instances where Mark was even held at gunpoint. In a later interview, Belinda mentioned that Mark had it the worst. Mark also later claimed that their father would repeatedly him. At the age of only 19, Mark successfully murdered a stranger, a gay man named David O'Hearn, in his own home for making advances on him, what would later become known as the now debunked gay panic. Mark murdered and brutally mutilated David's body, and used his severed hands to draw satanic symbols on his living room walls. 2 weeks later after that, on the 26th of June 1998, Mark would invite Frank Arkell, the mayor of Wollongong, over during a phone call, and Mark would use the opportunity to murder him too. During that time, Frank was mentioned in the Wood Royal Commission's report.
But it was after he lost his seat in 1991 that allegations of surfaced. He was named in Parliament twice, most recently in October 1996 by the then ALP backbencher Franca Arena. Mrs Arena claimed that along with Justice David Yeldham, Mr Arkell received preferential treatment by the Wood Royal Commission.
A person named John came forward that he was for years when he was 7 years old by Frank Arkell and others in a ring. Frank Arkell had been involved in child scandals in the years preceding his death. Although he was acquitted of child 6 months before his murder, investigations were ongoing and additional charges were expected to be filed. This, however, did not justify Mark's actions, as Frank would never be convicted of anything due to Mark. Mark Valera then became the youngest person in Australian history to be sent to the country's highest security prison and the third youngest to be sentenced to life without parole in New South Wales.
He drove him to do what he did. He's the one that should be in jail, not my brother.
Belinda blamed her father and was set on revenge.
A 15-year-old Belinda was still in school at the time of these heinous acts committed by her brother. At the start of Mark's trial, devastated by her brother being in jail, Belinda would turn to Mark's best friend, Keith Schreiber, for comfort and start having an affair with him, though this was later denied by Belinda. However, Elizabeth Carroll, Belinda's mother, after re-entering her child's lives following Mark's arrest, confirmed the affair in a statement. Carroll recounted that Belinda had confided in her about being seduced by a gentle Keith Schreiber in a car after they had shared a few bong hits. Less than 2 weeks after the beginning of the trial of Mark Valera, the Van Krevel family tragedy would continue. The father of the siblings, Jack Van Krevel, was found brutally murdered in his Albion home, merely 10 days after his son was sentenced to double murder. Shockingly, Mark's best friend and sister's lover, Keith Schreiber, had pleaded guilty to the murder of their father, claiming that he did it because his then lover, Belinda, had asked him to. During an interview in 2001, Belinda explained that on the 17th of August, the day before Jack Van Krevel was murdered, Belinda and Schreiber had planned to visit Mark Valera in jail. However, due to some issues, the visit was cancelled. Belinda then drove to Albion Park railway station to meet Schreiber. Together, they went to the Shell Harbour shopping centre, where Belinda would remain in the car while Schreiber went inside to buy something to eat. They spent 4 hours that day sitting in the shopping centre's car park, just talking about this and that, as Belinda recalled. After parting ways with Schreiber, Belinda returned to her father's house, where she was still residing at the time. Just after midnight, Keith Schreiber reached the house and quietly slid open the first side window he encountered. His intention was to kill, but he had not brought a weapon with him, but discovered an axe leaning against the garage door. Moments later, he stood over Jack Van Krevel, axe in hand, and shouted at him, "You'll never another kid again." Belinda was just one room away from the murder, hiding under the doona on her bed with her daughter Tia. She waited for the noises to cease and then opened the bedroom door. Upon noticing blood in the hallway, she quickly gathered Tia, placed her in the car, and drove approximately 10 kilometers away to Warilla police station to report the attack. Belinda also claimed in a 2001 interview that she did not know her father had a will, in which he left the siblings $280,000 in total, where she would get $190,000. She wanted to ask Mark for the rest of the money, since Mark was going to be in jail, and the money could then be used for her and her daughter to buy a new house. Despite her initial denial of any involvement, it was soon discovered by the police that Belinda had orchestrated her father's murder. During the second day of the committal hearing, a former school friend of both Belinda and Mark recounted a conversation in which Belinda, in the presence of her brother, would gather friends and inquire if anyone knew someone who would kill her father for $2,000. On top of that, Belinda's mum, Elizabeth, also testified that Belinda mentioned that she had proposed the idea to Schreiber that he murder her father for $2,000. Police apprehended Schreiber just hours after the murder, but it took an additional 9 months before they could charge Belinda with 1 count of murder and 1 count of soliciting murder. After pleading guilty, she was sentenced to 6 years in jail, while Keith Schreiber was sentenced to 16. Regarding her sentencing, In 2015, Belinda spoke to 60 Minutes Australia and said, "Without a doubt, it was worth it." You'd think that was all for Belinda. Well, no. Despite serving time in jail for the murder, Belinda van Krevel remained just as violent after her release. In July of 2013, in a frenzied and psychotic state fueled by a mix of prescription drugs and alcohol, she stabbed her partner, Marshall Gould, whom she had a baby with, 6 times in the neck, arm and leg. Upon surviving the attack, Marshall mentioned that Belinda was calling him Jack, her father, during the attack. She was sentenced to 3 years of jail time for nearly murdering her partner, though Marshall Gould initially did not want to report the attack to police and claimed that he was mugged by 3 men instead. It was the staff of the hospital that reported their suspicion. Unfortunately, the severe attack had left him wounded, but Marshall claimed that he still loved her and acknowledged that she had had a terrible childhood. Marshall also has tattoos of what he calls his femme fatale Belinda on parts of his body. This is just one of the tattoos. The others are a bit, well, I can't show you here. A year later, Belinda faced charges for pawning a stolen mobile phone and possessing methamphetamine, known locally as ice. The following year, Belinda was sentenced to 15 months in prison for stealing an elderly woman's handbag, suggesting that Belinda van Krevel may struggle significantly with abiding by the law.
I had no intentions of handing it in, but I just thought, oh, well, no one obviously wants it if no one's there with it, so I took it.
But police say the victim was sitting with her handbag in this cafe south of Wollongong.
In 2023, Belinda began a relationship and moved in with her new boyfriend, 56-year-old John Green. It was not long until Belinda's violent behaviour would surface yet again. On the 5th of March of that year, during a jealousy-fueled domestic altercation that turned physical, Belinda stabbed John multiple times. Belinda's fiery rage that day was due to her accusations that John had been sleeping with one of their neighbours. The argument allegedly started at a kebab shop, and upon returning home, Belinda hit John's face with a bottle, proceeded to take a knife from the kitchen and stabbed him multiple times. After passing out and then regaining consciousness, John was able to dial and call 000 before Belinda came back to stab him again in a rage and shouted, "You can't get anyone better than me." John was discovered by the police lying in a pool of his own blood. He was then rushed to hospital and underwent some serious surgery. Belinda's vicious attacks were eerily similar to her previous acts. Though she did not kill anyone, her serious mental illness, family history, and record of violence were taken into consideration. This time she was sentenced to more than 6 years in prison with a non-parole period of 4 years. Now, from the 2 cases we have mentioned, it's clear that the women had severely traumatic childhoods which led them to be physically violent later in life. Our first case, Katherine, was more brutal and sadistic, but that does not mean that Belinda's violence would not escalate further if she had still been let out into society. Katherine's childhood trauma was so severe, and having witnessed multiple of her father's attacks on her mother, in addition to her job at the slaughterhouse, her pathway to become a murderer was cemented. Of course, not all meat workers are dangerous. In this particular case, Katherine had already been exposed to violence from a very young age. Meanwhile, Belinda, who had also gone through some serious traumatic experiences caused by her father during her childhood, the crimes and trial of her brother Mark, as well as the sense of abandonment felt when her mother left, was without any kind of support from an early age. She used a form of violence towards her partners to retaliate, and a form of manipulation on her lover to do what she asked when she was merely a teenager. But once upon a time, Belinda asked,
How can you manipulate someone to kill someone?
She had answered her own question. So, what do you guys think about these 2 cases? How closely do you think our childhood trauma is linked to our behaviour later in life? What other factors can you find from these 2 cases that led them down their paths of violence? Thank you for watching. Don't forget, if you enjoy our content, please like and subscribe, and watch our previous video where we covered the infamous Snowtown murders, as one of the accomplices has recently been released. And as usual, any feedback and suggestions are welcome, so please comment down below. Thank you.